7 women quit in under a week. One was hospitalized for a severe nervous breakdown, and another simply vanished into thin air after spilling macchiato on his imported Persian rug. Working for Dante Costa, the undisputed head of the Chicago Costa Syndicate, was a death sentence draped in a lavish 6-figure salary. No one survived his explosive temper or his chilling silence. So when chronically clumsy Amelia Clark tripped over a metal wastebasket during her interview, everyone expected her to be carried out in a body bag. Instead, she brought the entire criminal empire to its knees. The towering glass structure of Costa Enterprises loomed over Michigan Avenue, casting a long, cold shadow over the bustling Chicago streets below. It was a Tuesday in mid-November, the kind of day where the wind off Lake Michigan felt like tiny shards of glass. Amelia Clark, 24 years old, and clutching a faux leather portfolio to her chest, stood shivering in the lobby. She was drowning in $70,000 of medical debt left behind by her late mother, staring down an eviction notice that had been taped to her apartment door that very morning. Desperation was a powerful motivator, powerful enough to push her through the revolving doors of a company heavily rumored to be the financial front for the Sicilian Mafia. Amelia wasn't a hero, and she certainly wasn't an undercover cop. She was just a girl who desperately needed the $120,000 base salary listed on the vague, terrifying job advertisement for an executive assistant to the CEO. The elevator ride to the 52nd floor felt like a slow ascent to the gallows. When the heavy silver doors slid open, she stepped onto a floor made entirely of polished black marble. A menacing man with a thick neck and a tailored suit, who she would later learn was Vincent Morelli. The family's underboss patted her down with a cold professional detachment before gesturing toward a set of imposing mahogany double doors. "He has 3 minutes," Vincent rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. "Don't waste them, and don't look him in the eye for too long." Amelia swallowed hard, her palms slick with sweat. She pushed the heavy doors open. The office was vast, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Behind a massive desk of reclaimed oak sat Dante Costa. He didn't look up when she entered. He was reviewing a ledger, his dark hair immaculately styled, his jaw sharp enough to cut glass. He radiated a terrifying, suffocating authority. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the scratch of his fountain pen. "Name?" Dante demanded, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver straight down her spine. "Amelia!" she squeaked. She cleared her throat, stepping forward. "Amelia Clark, I'm here for the—" Her sensible black pump caught the edge of a thick woven rug. Time seemed to slow down. Amelia pitched forward, her arms flailing. Her portfolio slipped from her grasp, bursting open like a piñata. Resume's medical bills she had accidentally mixed into her folder, and a half-eaten granola bar went flying across the pristine office. But it didn't end there. Trying to catch her balance, Amelia reached out and knocked over a heavy brass wastebasket. It clattered against the marble floor with the volume of a detonating grenade, rolling directly until it hit the toe of Dante Costa's expensive Italian leather shoe. Amelia lay spread-eagled on the floor, the wind knocked out of her, her cheek pressed against the cold marble. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the gunshot. She had heard the rumors. The last secretary had been dragged out by her hair for mixing up his schedule. What did he do to girls who threw granola bars at his desk? A heavy silence stretched. Amelia peeled one eye open. Dante had finally looked up. His dark, piercing eyes were fixed on the crushed granola bar resting on his ledger. Slowly, his gaze shifted to the tangled mess of limbs on his floor. "Miss Clark," Dante said slowly, the syllables dripping with an unreadable emotion. "Are you attempting to assassinate me with oats?" Amelia scrambled to her knees, frantically grabbing papers. "I'm so sorry I tripped. The rug it's slightly elevated and my heel caught and I didn't mean to." She paused, noticing a specific page she was about to shove back into her bag. It was one of the ledgers that had slipped off his desk in the chaos. Her eyes scanned the numbers out of pure habit. "Wait," Amelia mumbled, forgetting for a split second who she was talking to. She tapped a line on the spreadsheet. "This column is wrong. The offshore transfer from the Cayman accounts is listed as an asset, but based on the tax depreciation in the row above, it's a liability. Whoever did your books is skimming. Roughly $400,000 if my mental math is right. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Dante stood up. He was at least 6'3", towering and broad-shouldered. He walked slowly around the desk, stopping mere inches from where Amelia knelt. He leaned down, plucking the paper from her trembling hands. His eyes scanned the numbers, then darted to her flushed face. "Who sent you?" he asked, his voice deathly quiet. "My landlord," Amelia offered weakly. "He said if I didn't have rent by Friday, he was changing the locks." Dante stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. He looked at the medical bills scattered on the floor, noting the aggressive red past due stamps. He looked at the girl in the slightly frayed suit who had just uncovered a massive embezzlement scheme orchestrated by his senior accountant, James Whitaker. Dante reached into his pocket, pulled out a sleek silver money clip, and peeled off 5 crisp $100 bills. He dropped them onto the floor in front of her. "Buy better shoes," Dante ordered, turning his back to her. "You start tomorrow at 6 a.m. If you're late, I'll have Vincent throw you out the window." The first week was a masterclass in survival. The Costa family was not just a business. It was a highly organized machine of intimidation, extortion, and strategic violence, all hidden behind the pristine veil of a real estate and logistics conglomerate. Amelia quickly realized that her predecessors hadn't quit just because Dante was mean. They quit because the stress of working for a man who kept a loaded Glock 19 in his desk drawer alongside his Mont Blanc pens was enough to induce a coronary. But Amelia had a bizarre advantage. She was far more terrified of poverty than she was of the mafia. On Wednesday, she was tasked with making Dante's espresso. It had to be a specific bean, imported from a small farm in Sicily, ground to a precise consistency, and brewed at exactly 195 degrees. Amelia, operating on 3 hours of sleep and fueled by sheer anxiety, managed to jam the $10,000 La Marzocco espresso machine. When Dante walked into the private break room, he found his new secretary covered in coffee grounds, desperately trying to reattach a steaming valve with a paperclip. Vincent Morelli stepped up behind his boss, his hand instinctively resting on the holster beneath his jacket. "Want me to get rid of her, boss?" Vincent muttered. Dante watched Amelia wipe a smear of wet espresso across her forehead, making her look like a camouflaged soldier. He felt a strange foreign sensation in his chest. Amusement. "No," Dante said softly. "Leave her." Amelia's clumsiness ironically became an asset. On Friday afternoon, a package arrived from a courier. It was addressed personally to Dante. Amelia, rushing to bring it to his office, snagged her sleeve on the door handle and dropped the wooden box onto the hard floor. A loud snap echoed through the room. Dante drew his weapon in a flash, aiming it at the door. Amelia shrieked and dropped to the floor, covering her head. "Don't shoot, I just dropped it!" she cried out. Dante approached the shattered box carefully. The impact had cracked the wood wide open. Inside, surrounded by foam padding, was a crude homemade incendiary device. However, the drop had snapped the main triggering mechanism cleanly in half, rendering the bomb completely useless. It was a message from the Bianchi cartel, a rival outfit operating out of the South Side. If Amelia had opened the box normally, the tension wire would have sparked, blowing half the floor into oblivion. Dante stared at the broken bomb, then at his secretary, who was still cowering on the floor, apologizing profusely for breaking his mail. "Amelia," Dante said, his voice strangely gentle. "Yes, Mr. Costa," she whimpered. "Remind me to double your life insurance policy," he murmured. While her accidental bomb defusing made her somewhat of an urban legend among the hardened mobsters in the building, the real danger was brewing closer to home. Amelia's discovery during her interview hadn't been forgotten. Dante had ordered a quiet audit into James Whitaker, the firm's chief accountant. James was a slippery man with slicked back hair and a penchant for expensive suits he shouldn't have been able to afford. James knew Amelia was the one who had pointed out the discrepancy. He cornered her in the file room late one evening. "You think you're smart, little girl," James hissed, slamming the door shut. "You think playing the clumsy idiot fools anyone you're messing with things you don't understand." Amelia backed into a row of filing cabinets, her heart hammering against her ribs. I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Whitaker. I just type memos and ruin coffee machines. Keep your mouth shut about the Cayman accounts. James threatened stepping into her personal space, his breath smelling of stale gin. Or I'll make sure your eviction is the least of your problems. Before Amelia could respond, the heavy file room door swung open. Dante stood in the doorway, his silhouette imposing the ambient light, casting long, dark shadows across his face. The air in the room instantly grew heavy, thick with a lethal promise. "Is there a problem here, James?" Dante asked quietly. James went pale, stumbling backward away from Amelia. "No, Mr. Costa, just going over some filing procedures with the new assistant." "Good," Dante said. "Because if I ever find you alone in a room with her again, you'll be filing papers with your remaining hand. Get out." James scurried away like a rat. Dante stepped into the room, his eyes scanning Amelia from head to toe, checking for injuries. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Fine," she breathed, her knees shaking. Dante reached out his large, warm hand, gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch was so tender, so completely at odds with the violent world he inhabited, that it made Amelia's breath hitch. "Pack a bag," Dante ordered, pulling his hand away and letting the cold executive mask slip back into place. "We have a gala tomorrow night at the Drake Hotel. You're coming with me." The Gold Coast Gala was the crown jewel of Chicago's high society, an opulent event where billionaires, politicians, and mob bosses rubbed shoulders under the guise of philanthropy. It was the perfect place to launder a few $1,000,000 and broker illegal deals over champagne. Amelia stood in front of the mirror in the hotel suite Dante had rented for her to prepare. The dress he had sent up was a masterpiece, a sweeping gown of deep emerald silk that clung to her curves and made her striking green eyes pop. Paired with diamond earrings that probably cost more than her mother's entire medical debt, she looked less like a clumsy secretary and more like a mafia queen. When she stepped out into the hallway, Dante was waiting. He wore a custom midnight blue tuxedo looking like a dark god carved from marble. For a moment his eyes flared with something raw and possessive as he took her in, but he quickly blinked it away. "Stay close to me tonight," Dante instructed, offering her his arm. "Smile, nod, and whatever you do, do not touch the hors d'oeuvres tray. I don't need you causing a stampede." "Very funny," Amelia muttered, though she looped her arm through his, hyper-aware of the hard muscle beneath the expensive fabric. The ballroom was a sea of glittering chandeliers, flowing champagne, and dangerous people. Amelia stuck by Dante's side as he navigated the room, introduced to senators and shipping magnates. She played her part perfectly, observing the subtle power dynamics. About an hour into the evening, Dante was pulled aside by a politician, leaving Amelia standing near a massive ice sculpture of a swan. Taking a moment to breathe, she slipped out onto the adjoining terrace to get some fresh air. The balcony was dark and mostly deserted. As she stood near the edge looking out at the city lights, she heard hushed voices coming from the shadows below the sweeping staircase. "Whitaker gave us the all clear," a raspy voice whispered. "Costa's security is concentrated at the front entrances. He's totally exposed by the north windows." "And the girl?" another voice asked. "Collateral damage. Whitaker wants her gone anyway. When Costa steps up to the podium for the toast, take the shot. It has to look like the Bianchis did it." Amelia's blood ran cold. It wasn't the rival cartel. It was an inside job. James Whitaker was orchestrating a coup, planning to assassinate Dante and blame it on their rivals. Panic seized her. She had to get to Dante. Amelia turned and sprinted back inside the ballroom. The emerald dress, while beautiful, was not designed for running. She burst through the terrace doors just as the grand orchestra began to play a sweeping waltz. Across the massive room, she saw Dante making his way toward the raised podium at the north end of the hall, exactly where the assassins had said he would be exposed. "Dante!" She tried to scream, but the music and the chatter of 1,000 guests drowned her out. She pushed through the crowd, excusing herself, shoving aside billionaires and socialites. She could see the massive arched windows behind the podium. In the darkness outside, a faint red laser sight danced erratically, searching for its target. Dante stepped up to the microphone, tapping it twice. The room began to quiet down. The red dot settled squarely on the center of Dante's chest. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dante began, his commanding voice echoing through the speakers. Amelia had 10 feet to close. She didn't think. She just reacted. Throwing herself forward, her foot caught on the heavy velvet drapery pooling at the base of the stage. It was the clumsiest, most uncoordinated leap of her life. She pitched forward, her arms thrown out. She slammed into a waiter carrying a massive tower of champagne flutes. The waiter shrieked, stumbling forward. Amelia collided with Dante with the force of a freight train, knocking him sideways off the podium, just as the glass window behind them shattered into a million pieces. A high-caliber bullet ripped through the air where Dante's chest had been a millisecond before burying itself deep into a marble pillar. Chaos erupted. Women screamed, men dove for cover, and Vincent Morelli's security team immediately returned fire toward the broken window. Dante and Amelia lay in a tangle of limbs, shattered glass, and spilled champagne on the hard stage floor. Dante was breathing heavily, his body shielding hers instinctively. He looked down at her, his eyes wild with adrenaline and shock. "Amelia," he rasped, checking her for blood. "Are you hit?" "I'm fine," she gasped, clutching his tuxedo jacket. "It was Whitaker. I heard them on the balcony. He set you up." Dante's expression darkened, transforming from concerned protector to a ruthless predator in the blink of an eye. The boss of the Costa family had just been betrayed, and the only reason he was breathing was because the woman in his arms couldn't walk in a straight line to save her life. "Vincent!" Dante roared over the screaming crowd, pulling Amelia to her feet and pushing her safely behind his broad back. "Lock down the building, nobody leaves. Find James Whitaker and bring him to me alive." The night had just begun and the real war was about to start. Sirens screamed in the distance, their wailing echoing off the skyscrapers of the Gold Coast. Inside the Drake Hotel ballroom, the opulent gala had dissolved into absolute hysteria. Wealthy socialites, who minutes earlier had been sipping vintage Dom Perignon, were now crawling over shattered glass in torn couture. But Dante Costa moved through the panic with the chilling calm of a man who had been born in the eye of a hurricane. He didn't let go of Amelia. His large hand was clamped around her wrist, his grip unyielding as he dragged her through the labyrinth of the hotel's service corridors. They bypassed the main exits, moving seamlessly through industrial kitchens and laundry rooms until they reached the loading dock where a black armored SUV was already waiting its engine, idling with a low, menacing growl. Vincent Morelli stood by the open back door, an assault rifle resting casually against his thigh. He nodded once to Dante, his face an impenetrable mask of stone. "Get in," Dante ordered, practically shoving Amelia into the plush leather interior. He slid in right behind her, slamming the heavy reinforced door shut. Amelia collapsed against the seat, her lungs burning, her hands trembling violently. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, replaced by a cold, hollow shock. She had just tackled a mafia boss. Someone had tried to shoot them. There was a bullet hole in a marble pillar that was supposed to be in Dante's heart. "You're hyperventilating," Dante noted, his voice devoid of panic, though a muscle feathered in his jaw. He reached over, forcefully pushing her head down between her knees. "Breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth. If you pass out in my car, I will leave you on the side of Lower Wacker Drive." It was a lie, and they both knew it, but the sharp command grounded her. Amelia sucked in a ragged breath of the leather-scented air. "Whitaker," she choked out. "I heard him. It was Whitaker." "I know," Dante said softly, staring out the tinted window as they sped onto the expressway, leaving the flashing blue and red lights behind them. "Vincent has a team sweeping the perimeter. James won't make it past the city limits." The drive was agonizingly silent. They weren't heading back to her cramped, drafty apartment, nor were they going to the Costa Enterprises tower. Instead, the SUV tore through the dark, winding roads of Lake Forest, pulling into a sprawling, gated estate hidden behind towering oak trees and wrought iron fences. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. "My private residence," Dante said, stepping out of the vehicle and offering her his hand. "Nobody knows about this place except my inner circle. You will be safe here." Amelia hesitated, looking at his outstretched hand. It was stained with a smear of dried blood, not his, but likely from a guest he had shoved out of the way. She placed her trembling fingers in his palm, letting him guide her inside. The interior was stark, modern, and intimidatingly expensive. High vaulted ceilings, minimalist art, and floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over a private stretch of Lake Michigan. Dante directed her to a sprawling guest suite, tossing a black t-shirt onto the king-sized bed. "Shower, change, try to sleep," he commanded. "What are you going to do?" she asked, clutching her torn emerald gown. Dante turned in the doorway, his dark eyes turning flat and dead. "I have an appointment in the basement." James Whitaker was intercepted at O'Hare Airport trying to board a private charter. "It turns out Chicago PD Detective Richard Sullivan is on my payroll, and he pulled James off the tarmac before he could flee. Now, James and I are going to have a conversation about loyalty." Amelia shuddered. She didn't want to know what a conversation entailed in Dante's world. "Please, don't kill him." Dante paused. He looked at the clumsy, naive girl who had just saved his life. "In my world, Amelia, treason is paid for in blood. He tried to take my life. But worse, he endangered yours. I don't forgive that." He closed the door, leaving Amelia alone in the sprawling silence of the safe house. Down in the soundproofed basement, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of damp concrete and metallic fear. James Whitaker was tied to a heavy steel chair under a single glaring bulb. His expensive suit was torn, his slicked-back hair a mess. Dante slowly unbuttoned his tuxedo jacket, folding it neatly over a nearby table. He rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt, revealing forearms corded with muscle and faded scars. "My tea, Mr. Costa, please," James whimpered, spit flying from his lips. "It wasn't just me, I was just the middleman. The Bianchis threatened my family." "Don't lie to me, James," Dante murmured, picking up a heavy steel wrench from a workbench. "I saw the offshore transfers, $400,000. The Bianchis don't pay you to betray me. They pay you for information. But a hit that requires an inside sanction. Who gave the order?" "I don't know," James shrieked as Dante stepped closer. "He used a proxy, a ghost account I only ever communicated through an encrypted server." Dante stared down at the pathetic man. He knew James was a coward, and cowards always broke. But he also saw the genuine terror in the accountant's eyes. He really didn't know the identity of the mastermind. "Vincent!" Dante called out to the shadows. Vincent stepped forward. "Yeah, boss." "Take his thumbs," Dante ordered coldly. "And when you're done, dump him at the steps of the 21st District Precinct with a confession pinned to his chest. Let Detective Sullivan process him." As James began to scream, Dante turned and walked upstairs, pulling his phone from his pocket. The betrayal ran much deeper than a greedy accountant. Someone inside his own house was trying to burn it down. The next 3 days were a suffocating blur of luxury and paranoia. Amelia was confined to the Lake Forest estate, guarded by heavily armed men in dark suits who patrolled the grounds like silent ghosts. Dante was a phantom, leaving before dawn and returning long after she had fallen asleep. The tension in the house was a physical weight pressing down on her chest. Amelia was going out of her mind with boredom and anxiety. She had cleaned the pristine kitchen 3 times, tripped over the same Persian rug twice, and accidentally set off the perimeter alarm by trying to feed a stray cat outside the patio window. But Amelia Clark was not a girl who could sit still when her life was on the line. On the 4th morning, a torrential downpour lashed against the windows of the estate. Amelia sat at the massive oak dining table, staring at the high-end encrypted laptop Dante had left behind. He had told her to use it to stream movies, but Amelia's mind was still gnawing on the numbers she had seen the day of her disastrous interview. The Cayman accounts. She opened the browser. Using a backdoor trick she had learned while trying to navigate the predatory billing systems of her mother's hospital, she bypassed the superficial firewalls of Costa Enterprises' remote server. It wasn't hacking, exactly. It was just a profound understanding of how lazy corporate IT departments could be with directory permissions. For 6 hours, she forgot to eat. She cross-referenced the corrupted ledgers she had memorized with the live data on the server. James Whitaker had been sloppy, leaving a digital trail of breadcrumbs that led to a series of shell companies registered in Delaware. Aegis Holdings. Amelia muttered to herself, her eyes reflecting the glaring blue light of the screen. She dug deeper, her fingers flying across the keyboard and only occasionally hitting the wrong key. Aegis Holdings was funneling money directly to a maritime shipping company out of Navy Pier. That company was owned by a man named Gregory Higgins. But Higgins was a ghost, a fabricated identity. The real signature on the incorporation documents belonged to someone else. Amelia found the original PDF of the incorporation scan. The signature at the bottom was hasty, arrogant, and violently familiar. Her breath hitched in her throat. It was Donovan Reed. Donovan was the Costa family's chief legal counsel, a man who had known Dante since he was a teenager. Donovan was the one who negotiated their treaties with the mayor's office, the one who kept Dante out of federal prison. He was practically family, and he was the one funding the Bianchi cartel. Donovan had orchestrated the hit using James Whitaker as a disposable pawn. He wanted Dante dead so he could slide into the power vacuum, legally restructuring the Costa empire under his own name while the streets tore themselves apart. Amelia's hands shook as she grabbed her phone. She dialed Dante's private number, straight to voicemail. Panic spiked in her chest. She sprinted into the hallway, her socks sliding on the polished hardwood floors, causing her to crash shoulder first into the wall. She ignored the pain, scrambling toward the front door, where one of the guards, a young, broad-shouldered man named Caleb, was standing watch. "I need to speak to Dante, now?" Amelia demanded, clutching her bruised shoulder. Caleb frowned, checking his earpiece. "Mr. Costa is unavailable, Miss Clark. He's at a sit-down." "Where?" "I can't disclose that." "Listen to me, Caleb!" Amelia shouted, stepping into the massive guard's personal space. "He is walking into a trap. Donovan Reed is the traitor. He's the one who set up the hit at the gala. If Dante is meeting him, he's going to die." Caleb's expression shifted from bored stoicism to deep alarm. "He's at the Southside shipyards, Pier 34. He's meeting Donovan to discuss the fallout from the Whitaker leak." "Take me there," Amelia pleaded. "Now, my orders are to keep you here. If Dante dies because you followed an order to babysit me, what do you think the rest of the family will do to you?" Amelia challenged, her green eyes blazing with a fierce, unexpected authority. Caleb swallowed hard. He nodded once, drawing his weapon and grabbing the keys to a secondary SUV. "Let's go." The rain was coming down in sheets, transforming the industrial expanse of the Southside shipyards into a bleak, washed-out wasteland. Towering shipping containers created a maze of steel, casting long, claustrophobic shadows. Inside an abandoned warehouse at the end of Pier 34, Dante Costa stood with his hands in the pockets of his black trench coat. He was flanked by Vincent and two other loyal enforcers. Across the damp concrete floor stood Donovan Reed, looking immaculate in a tailored gray suit holding a silver umbrella. "It's a tragedy, Dante," Donovan was saying, his voice echoing off the corrugated iron walls. "Whitaker was a greedy fool, but with him gone we can restructure, consolidate the Southside territories." Dante stared at the man who had taught him how to tie a Windsor knot before his father's funeral. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating. "You're right, Donovan," Dante said smoothly. "We do need to restructure, starting with Aegis Holdings." Donovan's smile faltered just for a fraction of a second, but a fraction was all Dante needed. "I don't know what you're talking about, son," Donovan replied, adjusting his grip on his umbrella. "Don't insult my intelligence," Dante sneered, pulling a folded piece of paper from his coat, a bluff, just a blank sheet. But Donovan didn't know that. "Whitaker kept a physical ledger. He gave you up before Vincent removed his thumbs. You funded the Bianchis. You ordered the hit at the Drake." Donovan sighed a long, weary sound. He tossed the umbrella aside. "You were always too sharp for your own good, Dante, just like your father. And just like him, you don't know when to bow out." Donovan raised his hand. From the catwalks above, the shadows moved. 6 armed men mercenaries hired by Donovan stepped into the dim light, their laser sights painting a grid of red dots across Dante and his men. "You think you can take the Empire, Donovan?" Dante asked, his voice steady despite the overwhelming odds. "The capos will skin you alive. Dadifo. The capos will fall in line when I show them how much money we save without your archaic code of honor." Donovan countered, pulling a sleek pistol from his coat. "Goodbye, Dante." Outside, the roar of an engine cut through the torrential rain. Caleb was driving like a madman, weaving the SUV through the maze of shipping containers. Amelia was in the passenger seat, white-knuckling the dashboard. "It's Warehouse 7, Caleb shouted over the pounding rain. "It's locked down! There are shooters on the roof!" Amelia saw the massive corrugated steel doors of the warehouse approaching rapidly. She saw the armed lookouts scrambling on the roof, raising their rifles toward the incoming vehicle. "Drive through it!" Amelia screamed. "Are you insane? The doors are reinforced," Caleb yelled back, slamming on the brakes. The SUV began to hydroplane, skidding sideways across the wet asphalt. Amelia, acting on pure, reckless instinct, unbuckled her seatbelt and threw her body across the center console, slamming her foot down on top of Caleb's foot, forcing the gas pedal straight to the floor. "Hold on!" she shrieked. The 3-ton armored SUV became a missile. It hit a patch of standing water, spinning 180 degrees, before slamming backward into the warehouse doors with an earth-shattering crunch. Inside the warehouse, Donovan's finger was tightening on the trigger when the entire back wall exploded. Metal shrieked, sparks flew like fireworks, and a massive black SUV crashed through the doors, sending steel beams and concrete raining down. The vehicle spun wildly, taking out a support pillar before coming to a violent halt right in the middle of the standoff. The sudden catastrophic explosion of noise and debris threw everyone off balance. The mercenaries on the catwalks instinctively ducked, losing their aim. Donovan stumbled backward, shielding his face from the flying shrapnel. Dante didn't flinch. He was a predator bred for chaos. Before the dust even settled, Dante drew his weapon and fired. 2 mercenaries on the left catwalk dropped instantly. Vincent and the enforcers opened fire, creating a deafening symphony of gunfire that tore through the warehouse. Donovan scrambled for cover behind a stack of wooden crates, blindly firing back. Inside the smoking wreckage of the SUV, Amelia coughed, waving away the airbag dust. Her head was spinning, her elbow throbbing, but she was alive. Beside her, Caleb was groaning, clutching a bruised ribs. "Amelia!" Dante's voice roared over the gunfire. He was suddenly at the window, yanking the warped door open with terrifying strength. His eyes were wide, frantic as he scanned her body for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, hauling her out of the wrecked car and pushing her down behind the engine block for cover. "I'm fine," she gasped. "I found out about Donovan. I had to stop you." "By driving a truck through a building," Dante yelled, though there was a wild, incredulous smirk playing on his lips. "You are an absolute menace to infrastructure, Miss Clark." "You're welcome," she yelled back as a bullet pinged off the hood of the car. "Stay here! Do not move!" Dante commanded, his eyes darkening as he turned his attention back to the gunfight. The element of surprise had completely leveled the playing field. Vincent and the men had neutralized the shooters on the catwalk. The warehouse was eerily quiet, save for the patter of rain coming through the destroyed roof. Dante stepped out from behind the SUV, his gun raised. He walked slowly toward the stack of crates where Donovan had taken cover. It's over, Donovan." Dante's voice was cold, echoing in the cavernous space. Donovan stepped out his gun, empty his suit covered in dust and grease. He looked at Dante, then at the smoking SUV, and finally at Amelia, who was peering over the hood. "A secretary." Donovan laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "I spent millions orchestrating this coup, and I'm thwarted by a clumsy secretary." "She's not just a secretary," Dante said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "She's the woman who just ended your life." Dante didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger once. Donovan Reed collapsed to the cold concrete, a single hole between his eyes. The silence that followed was deafening. The reign of treason was over. Dante slowly lowered his weapon, the adrenaline fading, leaving only the grim reality of the violent world he ruled. He turned and walked back to the ruined SUV. Amelia stood up, trembling slightly as the gravity of the situation crashed over her. Dead bodies littered the floor. The smell of copper and cordite burned her nose. She had just participated in a mafia execution. Dante stopped in front of her. He reached out his blood-stained hands, gently cupping her face. He brushed a streak of soot from her cheek with his thumb. The cold, ruthless monster who had just executed his mentor was gone, replaced by a man looking at her with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. "Why did you come here?" Dante asked softly, his dark eyes searching hers. "You could have stayed at the house. You could have run." Amelia looked up at him, her heart hammering against her ribs for an entirely different reason now. "Because you gave me money for rent," she whispered, a small, nervous smile touching her lips. "And I don't leave debts unpaid." Dante let out a low, breathy chuckle, pulling her flush against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, breathing her in. "Amelia Clark," he murmured, his voice a vibration against her skin. "You are going to be the death of me. Only if you stand too close to me near an open window," she mumbled into his coat. For the first time in his life, Dante Costa threw his head back and genuinely laughed. He picked her up in his arms, ignoring the chaos around them, and carried her out into the rain. The drive back to the Lake Forest estate was a blur of flashing streetlights and the rhythmic heavy thrum of the SUV's tires against the slick asphalt. Dante hadn't let go of Amelia's hand since they left the smoking ruins of Pier 34. His grip was an iron vice, grounding her in the chaotic aftermath of the violence she had just witnessed. She was shivering not from the cold Chicago air blasting through the cracked windows, but from the sudden crashing realization of what she had done. She had aided in a mafia execution. She had driven a 3-ton vehicle into a warehouse. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. When they finally pulled through the wrought iron gates of the estate, the storm had begun to break, leaving behind a heavy mist-shrouded silence. Dante didn't wait for Caleb to open the door. He kicked it open himself, pulling Amelia out and marching her straight into the massive foyer. "Vincent!" Dante barked over his shoulder as the underboss followed them inside. "Double the perimeter. Nobody gets within a mile of this house without my explicit authorization. If a squirrel crosses the property line, I want it vetted." "On it, boss!" Vincent grunted, casting a lingering, almost respectful glance at Amelia before turning on his heel. Dante led her upstairs to the master suite, a sprawling room of dark mahogany and floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the turbulent waters of Lake Michigan. He guided her to the edge of the massive king-sized bed, gently pushing her down to sit. Without a word, he disappeared into the ensuite bathroom, returning a moment later with a first aid kit and a warm, damp towel. The ruthless syndicate boss, the man who had just put a bullet in his mentor's head without a flinch, knelt on the plush carpet in front of her. "Look at me," Dante said softly, his deep baritone barely above a whisper. Amelia tore her gaze away from her blood-speckled hands and looked into his eyes. They were obsidian black, swirling with an intensity that made her breath hitch. Gently, he took the warm towel and began wiping the soot and grime from her cheeks. His touch was painstakingly slow, treating her as if she were made of spun glass rather than the woman who had just weaponized an SUV. "You are shaking." He noted his thumb brushing over her lower lip. I think the adrenaline is wearing off." Amelia stammered, her teeth chattering slightly. "I just saw a man die, Dante. I helped you kill him." Dante's jaw tightened. He tossed the towel aside and grabbed a bottle of antiseptic, carefully dabbing a scrape on her elbow. "You didn't kill anyone, Amelia. You saved my life. Again. But in doing so, you stepped into a world that doesn't forgive and doesn't forget." Donovan was a traitor, yes, but he was also the primary financial bridge to the Bianchi cartel. Salvatore Bianchi is going to be out for blood, and when he finds out it was my secretary who dismantled his coup, you will be at the top of his list. Amelia swallowed hard. "So what happens now? Do I go into witness protection, change my name to Susan, and move to Nebraska to manage a Cinnabon?" Despite the gravity of the situation, the corner of Dante's mouth twitched upward. "No, you aren't going anywhere near Nebraska." He finished bandaging her elbow, closing the first aid kit with a definitive snap. He stood up, towering over her, his broad shoulders blocking out the dim light from the hallway. "I have a jet fueled and waiting at Midway." Dante stated, his voice devoid of its earlier warmth, replaced by cold, hard logic. "It can take you to Geneva. I have a chalet there heavily guarded. There's a Swiss bank account in your name with $10 million in it. Your mother's medical debts are already paid. Your eviction is handled. You can leave tonight, completely disappear, and never have to look over your shoulder again." Amelia stared at him. $10 million. A life of absolute safety far away from the gunfire, the betrayal, and the terrifying magnetic man standing in front of her. It was everything she had ever dreamed of when she was crying over past due bills in her freezing apartment. But as she looked at Dante, at the exhaustion lines around his eyes, At the way his hand hovered just an inch from hers, as if holding himself back by sheer willpower, she realized something terrifying. She didn't want the money. She didn't want Geneva. Amelia stood up. Her legs were shaky, but her gaze was deadlocked with his. "You're trying to get rid of me." "I am trying to keep you breathing." Dante fired back his composure, cracking his voice, raising a fraction. "You don't belong here, Amelia. You belong in a world with HR departments, coffee runs, and spreadsheets, not in a world where you have to dodge sniper fire at a charity gala." "I am the one who found the embezzlement," she yelled back, stepping into his space, completely ignoring the danger he radiated. "I am the one who found the shell companies. I am the one who drove the car. You think I'm just some helpless liability? Dante, you would be dead 3 times over if it weren't for my spreadsheets and my complete inability to walk in a straight line." Dante grabbed her by the shoulders, pulling her flush against his chest. The air in the room evaporated. "Do you have any idea what they will do to you if they get their hands on you? Salvatore Bianchi is a butcher. I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let him touch a single hair on your head, but I cannot guarantee your safety if you stay here." "Then don't guarantee it." Amelia whispered, her hand sliding up the lapels of his ruined coat, resting against the erratic beating of his heart. "Fight for it. Fight for me, because I'm not leaving." Dante stared down at her, the internal war raging in his eyes. He saw the stubborn fire in her green irises, the absolute refusal to back down. He realized then that the clumsy, chaotic girl had woven herself so deeply into his veins that cutting her out would be fatal. With a low, desperate groan, Dante's control shattered. He crushed his mouth against hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision, a fierce, demanding claim that tasted of ash rain and absolute possession. Amelia gasped, her fingers tangling in his dark hair as she kissed him back with equal ferocity. His hand swept down her spine, pulling her hips against his, leaving no space between them. For the first time in his life, the boss of the Chicago underworld felt entirely helplessly at the mercy of someone else. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for air, Dante rested his forehead against hers. "If you stay," he murmured, his voice rough and possessive, "you are mine. There is no backing out. There is no quitting. You stand by my side and we take this city together. Understood?" Amelia smiled, a brilliant, terrifyingly confident smile. "I'm going to need a raise." The war for Chicago didn't happen in the streets. It happened in a soundproof, mahogany-paneled boardroom on the top floor of the Palmer House Hilton. 3 days had passed since the incident at Pier 34. The underground economy of the city was hemorrhaging money. With Donovan Reed dead and the Aegis Holdings accounts frozen, the Bianchi cartel was suddenly starved of the millions they needed to pay off their politicians, judges, and enforcers. Desperate, Salvatore Bianchi called for a sit-down, a formal council of the city's ruling families to demand reparations from the Costa Syndicate. Dante wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that screamed bespoke power. He adjusted his cuffs in the reflection of the elevator doors. Beside him stood Vincent, heavily armed and vibrating with tension. And standing between them, clutching an encrypted titanium laptop to her chest, was Amelia Clark. She was dressed in a sharp, tailored black pantsuit that Dante had specially ordered for her, paired with sensible flat anti-slip loafers, a compromise after a heated argument about her physical safety. "I still think this is a terrible idea," Vincent muttered, eyeing Amelia. "No disrespect, Miss Clark, but bringing you into a room with Salvatore, the Romano brothers, and the Greco family is like throwing a bleeding steak into a shark tank." "She stays glued to my side," Dante said coldly. "She uncovered the financial web. She knows how to dismantle it. Today we don't just survive, we conquer." The elevator doors chimed and slid open. 2 massive guards at the end of the hall patted them down. Dante and Vincent surrendered their firearms. Amelia was allowed through with her laptop. Dante pushed open the heavy oak doors. The boardroom was tense. Around the massive oval table sat the most dangerous men in the Midwest. At the far end sat Salvatore Bianchi, a heavily scarred, balding man with dead reptilian eyes. To his left were the Romano brothers, who controlled the unions, and to his right sat aging patriarch Carlo Greco, who ran the ports. "Dante," Salvatore sneered, leaning back in his leather chair. "You have a lot of nerve showing up here after slaughtering Donovan Reed." He was an earner for all of us. He was a traitor in my house, Dante replied smoothly, taking a seat at the opposite end of the table. He gestured for Amelia to sit in the chair directly to his right. The other bosses exchanged confused, irritated glances. "Who is the girl?" Carlo Greco rasped, tapping his cane against the floor. "Since when do we bring secretaries to a syndicate tribunal? She is my chief financial advisor." Dante lied effortlessly. "And she is here to explain why the Costa family will not be paying a single dime in reparations." Salvatore slammed his fist on the table. "Donovan was brokering a real estate deal that was supposed to net my family $30 million. You killed him, you froze the Aegis accounts, and you stole my money. The commission demands blood Costa. Either you hand over the Southside shipping routes or we go to war." The room fell dead silent. The Romanos and Grecos watched closely. If Dante showed weakness, they would all pounce like hyenas. Dante leaned back, lacing his fingers together. He didn't look at Salvatore, he looked at Amelia. "Miss Clark, the floor is yours." Amelia's heart was hammering so loudly she thought the entire table could hear it. She was sitting in a room full of murderers. But as she opened her laptop, the screen illuminating her face, the fear began to recede. Numbers made sense. Spreadsheets didn't carry guns. They just told the truth. She connected the laptop to the massive projector screen at the head of the room. "Gentlemen," Amelia began, her voice shaking slightly before she cleared her throat and found her steel. "Mr. Bianchi claims that the Costa family cost him $30 million. But the truth is the Bianchi family doesn't have $30 million. In fact, they are entirely insolvent." Salvatore's face turned a violent shade of purple. "What is this nonsense? Shut her up, Dante, or I'll cut her tongue out myself." Dante didn't move, but his eyes promised unimaginable agony if Salvatore breathed in her direction. "Let her speak." Amelia clicked a button. A massive web of banking transactions appeared on the screen. "While I was auditing the Aegis Holdings accounts, I noticed a pattern of aggressive leveraging." Amelia explained, her fingers flying over the keyboard. She stood up, walking toward the screen to point out specific data points. "Salvatore hasn't been using Costa money to fund his operations. He's been using loans taken out against the Romano family's pension funds and the Greco family's dockside equity." A murmur of shock rippled through the Romano brothers. Carlo Greco leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Explain." "It's titter." "It's a classic Ponzi structure," Amelia said, finding her rhythm. "Salvatore used Donovan Reed to create ghost assets. He promised the Romanos and Grecos a 20% return on their investments in a non-existent casino project in Gary, Indiana. He took your money, used it to pay off his own cartel's massive gambling and narcotic debts, and planned to use the Costa family's stolen real estate equity to pay you back before you noticed." She clicked another button. The screen flooded with Salvatore's personal offshore ledgers. "Salvatore Bianchi is broke," Amelia declared, turning to face the table. "He owes the Romano family $15 million. He owes the Grecos $12. And if you go to war with Dante Costa, you will never see a dime of it because the money is already gone." The atmosphere in the room shifted from tense to violently volatile. The Romano brothers slowly turned to look at Salvatore, their expressions murderous. "Is this true, Sal?" the elder Romano asked, his voice deadly quiet. "It's fabricated," Salvatore shouted, standing up so fast his chair tipped over. "She's a plant, a lying, clumsy little bitch." Salvatore lunged across the table toward Amelia, his hand reaching inside his jacket for a holdout weapon the guards had missed. Amelia panicked. She scrambled backward, her foot catching on the heavy base of the projector stand. She flailed her arms, swinging wildly. Her hand collided with a massive crystal pitcher of ice water sitting on the table. The pitcher launched through the air like a missile directly into Salvatore Bianchi's face. The heavy crystal shattered against his jaw with a sickening crack. Ice water shards of glass and blood exploded across the mahogany table. Salvatore let out a muffled scream, dropping the small derringer he had just unholstered, and collapsed to the floor, clutching his ruined face. Dante was out of his chair in a millisecond, vaulting the table and planting his heavy Italian shoe squarely on Salvatore's throat before the man could recover. Vincent had his own hidden ceramic blade pressed to the elder Romano brothers' neck just in case they got any ideas. But the Romanos and Grecos didn't move to help Salvatore. They stared at the documents on the screen, then at the groaning, bleeding cartel boss on the floor. Amelia was on her hands and knees, peering over the edge of the table, her face flushed with embarrassment. I'm so sorry about the picture. I tripped. The room was silent, save for Salvatore's gurgling. Carlo Greco let out a slow, raspy chuckle. Dante, my boy, your financial advisor has a hell of a left hook. Dante looked down at Salvatore, applying just enough pressure to make the man gasp for air. He looked over at the other families. The Bianchi cartel is finished, Dante announced, his voice echoing with absolute authority. Salvatore's territories now belong to the Costa family. In exchange, I will make the Romano and Greco families whole. I will cover his debts to you. We consolidate the city, we modernize, and we stop bleeding each other dry. Do we have an agreement? The Romano brothers looked at the financial data, then at the broken man on the floor. They nodded simultaneously. Carlo Greco tapped his cane twice in agreement. Dante removed his foot from Salvatore's neck. Vincent, drag this trash out of here and hand him over to Detective Sullivan. Let him rot in Stateville. Dante walked over to where Amelia was dusting off her knees. He reached down, grasping her hand and pulling her up. He didn't care who was watching. He pulled her against him, kissing the top of her head. You, Dante whispered against her hair, are the most dangerous weapon I have ever possessed. 6 months later, the Chicago skyline glittered under a blanket of pristine white snow. The Costa Enterprises building stood taller and more imposing than ever. The hostile takeover of the Bianchi territories had gone smoother than anyone anticipated, largely because the transition was orchestrated by a mind that understood corporate restructuring better than any mobster ever could. On the 52nd floor, things had changed. Amelia no longer sat at the front desk. She had her own massive corner office adjacent to Dante's. The floors were carpeted in a thick plush material to prevent slipping. The desk had rounded edges. The coffee machine was fully automated and practically indestructible. She was reviewing the quarterly earnings for their legitimate shipping ventures when the adjoining doors swung open. Dante walked in looking like a dark, devastatingly handsome king. He locked the doors behind him, flipping the blinds shut with a flick of a switch. Amelia smiled, taking off her blue light reading glasses. Mr. Costa, is there a problem with the union ledgers? Dante walked slowly toward her desk, his eyes dark and predatory. No problems with the ledgers. However, there is a glaring issue with your hand. Amelia blinked, looking down at her left hand. My hand, I didn't slam it in a drawer today, I promise. Dante rounded the desk. He reached down gently, taking her left hand in his. It's too light, Amelia. It needs an anchor. He reached into the pocket of his tailored suit and produced a velvet box. He didn't drop to one knee, kings didn't kneel, but he stood before her with an emotional vulnerability that was exclusively hers. He snapped the box open. Inside sat a flawless emerald-cut diamond flanked by 2 deep green emeralds that perfectly matched her eyes. It was a ring that cost more than a small island nation, a ring that signaled to the entire underworld that she was untouchable. You walked into my office a year ago, destroyed my rug, threw a granola bar at my head, and dismantled my entire operation. Dante said, his voice a low, rough rumble. You are chaotic. You are entirely incapable of drinking coffee without spilling it, and you are the single greatest thing that has ever happened to me. Amelia's eyes filled with tears, her breath catching in her throat. Marry me, Amelia. Dante commanded, though it was the softest command he had ever given. Rule this city with me. Amelia stood up. She went to throw her arms around his neck, but in true Amelia fashion, her toe caught the edge of her ergonomic desk mat. She stumbled forward, practically headbutting Dante in the chest. Dante caught her, effortlessly wrapping his strong arms around her waist, a deep rumbling laugh echoing in his chest. Yes, she whispered, looking up at him, her heart completely irreversibly surrendered. I'll marry you. Dante slid the heavy cold diamond onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that promised a lifetime of chaos, power, and an all-consuming, terrifying love. No secretary lasted a week with the Sicilian Mafia Boss, but the queen, she was going to last forever. From a desperate, clumsy girl drowning in debt to the undisputed queen of the Chicago Mafia, Amelia's story proves that sometimes the biggest mistakes can lead to absolute power. She didn't just survive the most dangerous man in the city, she conquered him. Did you love this intense, pulse-pounding mix of romance, betrayal, and underworld drama? If Amelia and Dante's chaotic love story kept you hooked, please hit that like button, share this video with your fellow mafia romance addicts, and subscribe to our channel, ring the bell for more gripping true-to-life stories.